It's been over a month since Endgame premiered, and we can't stop, won't stop, breaking down Easter eggs in past films and what they might mean for future movies. But aside from the bygones and hereafter, what about the parallel timeline? Have you ever thought that there's a parallel timeline without Spider-Man? Or what about one where Ragnarok didn't happen and Tony Stark never saw his father alive? Let's count all these parallel timelines and think about what's happening there right now. Hi, I'm Peter.
Hi, I'm Peter, and you're watching OSSA channel.
Damn you, Endgame!
See? That's what I'm talking about. Yep, there's nothing more exciting than the multiverse, and I come from a timeline where you are more successful and have a better sense of humor.
Oh, and a jerk. But let's start with the breakdown. A universe where there's no Captain America.
And mind the spoilers to Endgame ahead. Steve didn't go back in time per se, it was within our universe. So we have to understand that both Steve and Peggy have different identities and characters.
So the writer Christopher Marcus said that Cap went back to 1948, meaning it was already 3 years after Cap was stuck in the ice.
It also means that our Steve was the one and only Steve Rogers still on the surface and not on ice. So there's no dilemma of him meeting his other self.
Steve went there to spend his life with the only woman he ever truly loved, so that in that universe, he couldn't spend his time fighting Hydra and later chasing Bucky or solving any other world crisis.
That means that in that timeline, our Cap didn't become the superhero that we know him to be. And he couldn't let his other self become a hero either. Because imagine how Peggy would freak out if she found out that the man she's kissing in the living room in the ending scene isn't even the same man with whom she fell in love with a couple of years earlier.
Even if 2023 Steve could explain everything, what are the chances that she would pick him and not try to save her pre-existing Steve who's stuck in the ice? It's clear that the best choice for our Cap would be to keep his mouth shut. Just like you should. It's my show, man.
So, yeah, it's most likely that the 2023 version of Steve Rogers didn't reveal the location of the Steve from that timeline, since it would have brought up too many questions. So I'm about 90% certain that the Earth in that timeline was left without Captain America's heroism.
The only thing that Cap could do is maybe hint somehow about Hydra's role in S.H.I.E.L.D's origin. I mean, he could have warned someone that Hydra and Zola can't be trusted and indicate where to find the clues to prove it. Because otherwise, that doesn't match up with Captain America's scrupulous morals at all.
So, we can assume that even though our Steve could live with the fact that parallel Cap was left frozen in the ice for 66 years, we at least hope he warned someone about Hydra.
I couldn't imagine living my life normally, knowing what horrible things are happening to other people around me, while I had enough knowledge to uncover it and put a stop to it.
Plus, that means that Cap knew that Bucky was being tortured and brainwashed by the Russians and Hydra after his fall. But he was all like, oh, sorry, Buck, I'm too busy having dinner with my wife to come help you, bro.
Mother of God, how pompous does Steve sound in that parallel universe? Now let's talk about Thor.
How about a timeline where Asgard vanished earlier?
Or how about a timeline where Asgard is actually thriving to this very day?
Yes, there are two possible outcomes. So, from Endgame, we know that Fat Thor has traveled back in time to the parallel universe to take the stone back, but that he also took his Mjolnir with him.
It means that all good-looking and fit Thor is left without Mjolnir in that timeline.
Since Rocket got the ether out of Jane before Malekith came, he probably wouldn't attack Asgard and Frigga wouldn't be killed. It also means that there'd be no need for Thor and Loki to pair up, and there'd be no sweet brother reunion in that particular universe.
On the other hand, Malekith and Ulgrim couldn't know that the Reality Stone had left Asgard, so they're probably on their way to attack Thor's homeworld.
And what a bummer! Thor doesn't have his hammer. How would he fare in a fight without it? Well, it's very possible that without his weapon of choice, he could lose that battle. So there's the chance that even if Malekith didn't obtain the ether, he still could conquer Asgard. But that's the worst case scenario. Since Frigga knew that Thor from 2023 wasn't her real son, and she saw him take Mjolnir, she could have foreseen such a bad outcome. What would you do if you knew that you needed to fight but your weapon was gone, stolen by your more selfish alternate self? You get a new one, and there's a possibility that in that parallel universe, the Dwarf King Atri had enough time to make a new weapon for Thor, which would mean he'd have his Stormbreaker before the enemies came. As Atri said, a king's weapon, meant to be the greatest in Asgard. In theory, it could even summon the Bifrost. Thus, we can assume that Thor had every chance to crush Malekith and even Hela, preventing Ragnarok and saving his homeland. This leads to many changes in how the Avengers would have defeated Thanos. It might even bring up a whole new parallel timeline where Thor is not defeated by Hela, so there's no chance he'd meet Hulk in Sakaar, and poor Banner would have to keep fighting in the Grandmaster's arena till the end of his life. All of these scenarios have one thing in common: Loki and Thor wouldn't reconcile. Though it's sad, as an outcome of all the changes, there's equally a chance that Loki didn't die during Infinity War in that universe, meaning there was no need for Thor to audition for a sequel to The Big Lebowski. Well, we hope you don't have a headache after all this madness, because some even more crazy ideas are coming. There's a timeline where Endgame didn't happen. When Thanos from the past invaded our universe in 2023, both he and evil Nebula were defeated. The question about Gamora is still open. Whether she's turned to dust or she's still hiding somewhere, the Guardians of the Galaxy will have to answer that. What we do know for sure, Gamora doesn't share Thanos' point of view anyway, which means that there's a universe where Endgame didn't take place. But even though that timeline is free of Thanos, that doesn't mean he's the only one who could cause Endgame. What about Loki? Perhaps I underestimated you, ugly Peter. No, I'm right. When the Avengers squad traveled back to 2012, the year of the Battle of New York, and failed to take the Tesseract, Loki, by contrast, wasn't so clumsy and took advantage of the situation. His escape with the Tesseract created another new timeline, where Thor's traitorous brother possesses the Tesseract and can do whatever he wants. This possibly means that there's no happy ending or reconciliation for his relationship with Thor. And what's more important is that he could become even more twisted in his pursuit of revenge, taking over Asgard, establishing his dictatorship, and, of course, fighting with his brother Thor. And there's only two possible outcomes in that scenario. Either Thor or Loki kill one another, or one of them is alive but under custody, and with the power of the Tesseract, it's more than likely that Thor's the one who'll be defeated. Or Loki might go after a bigger target, collecting all the Infinity Stones for himself in order to impose his regime everywhere in the universe and kill anyone who didn't obey. I mean, he wouldn't have to snap away half of the universe's population, but simply destroy people who didn't agree with him, since his main motivation has always been power and recognition. And finally, we've come to the saddest timeline of all, the one where there's no Spiderman or Doctor Strange. Doctor Strange's crazy plan was based on a random event. A rat running over the computer display, pressing the right button. Ant-Man coming back, telling the remaining Avengers all about time travel in the quantum realm and saving all those people. The chances that the rodent would do its job were 50-50. Even the Russos admitted that, saying, among the many realities in those 14 million possible futures that Doctor Strange foresaw, the mouse failed to press the button, and thus the heroes failed in those futures. This means only one thing. There's a parallel universe where the Avengers failed because that mouse was killed in a mousetrap. This means that not only half the universe never came back, but that we'd never see Spider-Man, Doctor Strange, Black Panther, and Wanda ever again either. Well, at least Tony and Natasha would stay alive in that timeline, though even that's ambiguous, because it's impossible to choose which Avengers I'd sacrifice over each other. People who remained had to move on, just like Cap said, and the whole world would be mourning for many years. That's truly horrible. But I'd probably be more disappointed to find out that there's a timeline where Tony Stark never, ever met his father.
So, when the Avengers needed to get the Space Stone out of the Tesseract, they had to break it, just like Thanos did.
They couldn't return the stone to the cube, and as we know, the Tesseract was created by Asgardians, so there's very little possibility that they'll have made a new cube.
We already know that the Space Stone is too powerful to hold in your unprotected hands, and that it can create a portal just like the Bifrost, which can send you far away if it doesn't consider you worthy.
It simply has too much power and could destroy you if you don't use it carefully.
So when Howard Stark came back to the storage facility in the 1970s after Cap returned the stone, he may only have found the stone there and not the protective Tesseract.
Based on his inquisitive scientific mind and slightly reckless approach to invention, we're pretty sure Howard would investigate the stone, and there's a big chance that something could have gone wrong, so the whole base, including Howard Stark, would probably end up as a crater.
From Endgame, we know that Howard's wife was expecting their baby, so Tony would be born, but he'd never get to meet his father.
Who knows? Maybe in that timeline, Tony would never have become Iron Man, as without his father's guidance, who'd teach him everything that the Tony from our universe knew?
Parallel timelines. It's a bit like a game of chess. Each move creates a new set of possible outcomes in the future. But in the end, only one side can win.
Wow, hey, that's a nice metaphor.
And here's the end game. Checkmate. Thank you for watching. Let me know if you came up with any other possible outcomes for parallel timelines in the comments below. Thank you, and please don't forget to subscribe and tell all your parallel selves if you liked the video.